What is pedogamy and how is it connected with Mormon polygamy? We'll talk about that next on Polygamy. What love is this? I was recently sent a link from a viewer who thought that we might be interested in today's topic, and indeed it was very timely and appropriate, and we would like to thank our viewer for sending it to us. The link was a web page that was discussing the polygamy of the early Mormon Church and its strange leanings toward and the practice of child brides. And not just the practice, but actually grooming young girls to accept the idea of becoming a plural wife of an old man. Now, the author of the web page said she coined the word pedogamy for her research, and I checked several dictionaries and the word pedogamy was not there. So since she coined the word, we will quote her definition of pedogamy.
A neologism I coined for much older men marrying young women, young girls. And the neologism is a real word, right? A newly coined word or expression, and so she came up with pedogamy.
Right, and it's very good. I think it's very appropriate, and it is older men marrying young girls, and the fact that they train and condition the girls to do this from the cradle. So the topic of this segment is pedogamy, both in Mormon polygamy of the 1800s and pedogamy in Mormon polygamy groups today. Now, the author of the website has done her own genealogy, and she found that there was polygamy and pedogamy in her family ancestry.
Right.
And of course, any generational Mormon, almost all of them, will find polygamy and pedogamy in their family tree as well. When the Mormons first settled in the Salt Lake Valley, they were pretty much isolated for a while. They were free to practice their religion, and polygamy, of course, was a core belief and practice. But everywhere the Mormons planted themselves, polygamy was illegal when they got there. Now, Utah was a territory of Mexico when the Mormons first settled here, but polygamy was illegal in Mexican law as well as in the United States. It's well known that the Mormons did whatever they wanted to do in spite of the legality of what they were doing, and polygamy was no exception. Travelers passing through Utah to other destinations were shocked at things that they discovered about the Mormon way of life as they were passing through.
Yeah, we have a number of quotes today from the Utah Bee, so you can look up the utahbee.com. But it says, faithful Mormons, Mormon dissidents, short-term visitors, and those just simply passing through in migration parties headed elsewhere were deeply affected by the blatant display of girls being groomed and pressured into sexual and marital practices that made non-Mormons blush or worse.
Now, polygamy itself was bad enough. And by its very nature, it quickly empties the pool of available girls that are of marriageable age.
Sure.
So in order to continue to live polygamy, they must either get marriageable females from outside of the group or seek out the younger generation of females to marry, which is what they did.
Yeah, listen to this. Sarah Hollister Harris reported in 1851 that Mormon girls were being told that the greater the age disparity between them and their husbands, the greater their eternal reward. Referring to 15-year-old Charlotte Ives Cobb, who resided in the Lion House at the time as a stepdaughter of Brigham Young, Harris said, she was, with many other young girls, made to believe the hideous doctrine that the older the man they married, the greater would be their glory in the world to come.
So just, I know, it makes you upset. You know, just like all the other Mormon doctrines, they took pedogamy and they put a spiritual turn to it, spiritual twist to it, making false promises of blessings for obedience and a greater eternal reward. Now, this was part of their brainwashing and mind control techniques, grooming young girls to accept old married men as husbands. And sadly, people who are born into a culture, and they know nothing else, they're brainwashed to believe it's God's word and God's will, and they cannot even know how bizarre the belief system is until they actually get out of it. And I know that for a fact. I was born and raised in it. So young women that are groomed from the cradle to expect and accept old polygamous men as husbands, they gladly submitted to it and even pursued older men for their husbands.
Now, this is a strange example. In 1941, Wanda Clayton Thomas asked William Clayton's last surviving wife, Anna Higgs, how a girl only 17 years old could marry a man in his early 50s who already had so many wives and children. Higgs replied that she fell in love with him, Clayton, before he ever knew her and just had to follow him from church to hear him speak. I wanted to be with him in the hereafter. I courted him. That's brainwashing.
That's brainwashing, yeah. Very much so. And this was not a rare situation. It was normal during the early days of Mormon polygamy and certainly occurs over and over again in today's Mormon polygamy groups. One sad story is often told about Orson Pratt, who at the beginning, when polygamy was first introduced, he despised it. He refused to have anything to do with it and was excommunicated for a few months because of his disagreement with Joseph Smith over it. But he had a drastic change of mind, and he ended up coming back, getting baptized, and started taking plural wives. And he took more and more women to his plural marriage bed and began taking very young wives. We have a quote from his first and legal wife, Sarah Pratt.
Yeah, this is from Richard S. Van Wagner's book, Mormon Polygamy, A History. The rest of the time he had been courting, marrying, and having children with a succession of much younger women. As Sarah became older, she felt increasingly lonely and completely unfulfilled in her marriage. In an 1877 interview, Sarah said, "Here was my husband, gray-headed, taking to his bed young girls in mockery of marriage. Of course there could be no joy for him, except the indulgence of his fanaticism and something else, perhaps, which I hesitate to mention."
Well, I think we can guess. And Pratt's last plural wife was 16 years old, and he was 57 years old. Pedogamy was an active force in early Mormon polygamy and today as well. We have another experience to share from 1856.
Yeah, again from the Utah Bee. Disgruntled German Mormon Hans Peter Emanuel Hoth reported in 1856, girls of 12 to 14 are married, and often to men who are 60 and even older. The old men who had several wives of the same age as they themselves always sought to get one or two young women caught in the trap. If a young woman refused, the old man would say that he had had a revelation from God to take her for his wife. If she was still unwilling, then he would call her an unbeliever. I have had several experiences along those lines in my own family.
And they still do it today. The men, when they're out looking for a wife and they want the particular girl, will say God gave them a revelation to take her.
Amazing how it works.
Oh, it is amazing. And of course, many lies were told and deceit is perpetrated, denials of what was actually going on, and even outright admission of their perversion on marriage, and they blamed it all on the Lord. Lying for the Lord. The Lord said, they said, to be a polygamist or go to hell, and that is a lie. Now, few teenagers would choose to marry a doddering old fool who was probably a great-grandfather with already had many wives, and then turning around and blaming it on God was the power tool that they used to convince her to submit. Well, that still goes on in polygamy groups today. But God never told anybody ever to live polygamy. Instead, he prohibited polygamy. Polygamy is not the way to heaven. Jesus is. Another testimony about their pedogamy was written up in the New York Times in 1857.
Unappropriated women are becoming scarce in the territory, and the polygamous monsters of the Mormon Church are beginning to compel the merest children to their wicked embraces. It was only a few days ago that two little girls between 10 and 11 years of age were sealed to old men. It is a very common occurrence for girls of 14 years to be taken as wives. One object seems to be to get these children into the horrible system of polygamy before they are old enough to think for themselves, or the natural delicacy of the sex shall be aroused and rebel against it.
And that's one reason today's polygamy groups were doing it, getting the young girls, because they would get too old to think for themselves,
So
and
they
they
get
wouldn't.
sealed, and then at 10 or 11, and then they just assumed that at 14 or 15 they're going to marry.
Belongs to them, yeah. And this article that Earl just read was published in the New York Times, but it was also published throughout the country, in New York and Kansas and Ohio and Tennessee and Illinois, and the readers around the country became extremely upset with what they were reading. And you know what? It's no wonder why early Americans were upset with the Mormons.
Yeah.
You know, we don't get that side of the story very often. And of course, no polygamy show is complete without bringing Brigham Young into it. So here we go.
Although not specifying age, Brigham Young spoke to the public on September 21st, 1856, about his wives complaining to him about marrying young women. He said, "If my wife had borne me all the children that she would ever bear, the celestial law would teach me to take young women that would have children."
So see, they make up these laws and then they say that's what they have to do. And of course, the celestial law that he refers to was then and is now polygamy. Now, these old polygamous men would barter off their daughters to other old polygamous men. Wilford Woodruff tried to get Brigham Young to marry his 14-year-old daughter, Phoebe Amelia. And Brigham Young was 56 years old at the time. And we don't know why Brigham declined Woodruff's offer. He just said he didn't want any more young wives at the time. But he encouraged the old man Woodruff by telling him that he would see to it that his 14-year-old daughter would soon be married off to someone else.
2 months later, on April 1st, Woodruff wrote to a fellow apostle, George A. Smith, "Nearly all are trying to get wives until there is hardly a girl 14 years old in Utah but what is married or just going to be." Woodruff himself had married 15-year-old Emma Smoot Smith in 1853 when he was 46.
There we go.
Wow.
Over 3 times his age, and we'll see that later on. That happened a lot. There was a Mr. Wilkins who had fled Utah and moved his family to Placerville, California. In July of 1857, he told a Sacramento newspaper that the social upheaval and dissension in Utah was one of the reasons he left the state. He said that what was most sickening to him and to others was Brigham Young sealing young girls to old men.
Wow.
Almost all the quotes that we've used is from the website on the screen at the utahbee.com, and it is accurate Mormon history, although it might be history that most people this may be new to them, or you haven't heard much about it in the past, but it is there for you to read. And despite LDS claims otherwise, the age disparity in early Mormon polygamous marriages was not the normal for the time and the culture. Now, there are many pro-polygamy and faithful followers of Joseph Smith who point out that it was not unusual for teenage girls to be married and that we shouldn't hold marriage customs of the 19th century the same standard today. And we're going to show that that's not true. But even if it were, did all those young girls marry old men? No. Now, so we're going to quote one of Joseph Smith's most ardent defenders, who is Brian Hales, who suggests that the reader also consider an article at the link on the screen, journal.interpreterfoundation.org. So, of course, when he suggested that, we went there and read the article, and the article suggested that underage marriages and child brides was normal in the United States during the time in question.
Yep, he says this: "Critics of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have accused Joseph Smith and other early Latter-day Saint men of pedophilia because they married teenage women. Indeed, they have emphatically declared that such marriages were against 19th century societal norms. However, historians and other experts have repeatedly stated that young people married throughout the 19th century, and such marriages have been relatively common throughout all of U.S. history. This article examines some of the accusations of early Latter-day Saint pedophilia and places such marriages within the greater historical and social context, illustrating that such marriages were normal and acceptable for their time and place.
Well, that's not true. And notice that he said that because they married teenaged women. No, no, they're not a woman yet. And so that it's funny how they will use little words like that to turn our mind to thinking the way they want us to think.
Teenage women.
Yeah. It's teenage girls.
Yeah.
And then they presented examples of young people who got married in the early American times. Now, we don't have time to cover everything in that article. You can read it and hopefully properly disseminate the information for yourself. However, I also did some digging and discovered that it was not normal for 12, 14, and 16-year-old girls to marry during those early Mormon history times. Did it happen? Yes, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't the average, as some have suggested. In fact, I have a chart which we will put up on the screen there, as you can see, showing that the average age of 19th century females were in their 20s when they first got married. Actually, they were over 21 years old, almost 21 and a half. The vertical line there on the left side of the chart indicates the time frame of the mid-1850s in the United States, and the median age for the female was over 21 years old.
Wow.
Okay. Any viewer that would like this chart, just email us at contact@whatloveisthis.tv, and we'll send you this chart for your own information. So they were just kind of twisting the facts to back up and to support Joseph Smith and the early Mormons. Now, the author of the original report on the Utah Bee answered her critics like this. This is her response.
Yes. In the data I have collected over many years, I have found that a significant number of girls aged 11 through to 16 were married in Utah to men at least a decade older than they were. Some men were even in their 60s when they married these girls. These girls were giving birth to children within a year or so of marriage, proving that these marriages to child brides included sex. Apologists respond to this by claiming that this was not uncommon in America back then, and that we have no right to place our modern ethics on a time and culture so far removed from us. However, the data that I have collected on American marital practices of the mid-1800s does not bear this out at all. Child brides marrying significantly older men were very rare everywhere I investigated, except in Utah. There are also plenty of contemporary indications that it was these polygamous marriages, a neologism I coined, for much older men marrying young girls, that were especially noxious to non-Mormons, not necessarily polygamy per se. They clearly transgressed the mores of those days as well, bringing down the ire of the world on Mormonism.
And rightfully so, I must say.
Yeah.
Now, in her own family, the author discovered that her third great-grandmother was married on her 15th birthday to a man who was 46 years old. And there's another who was more than 3 times her age, and this is pedogamy, according to her definition. She writes about a man, Thomas Sharp, who reported in the Warsaw Signal newspaper, March 1846, that the first expedition of Mormons heading west out of Nauvoo provided themselves well with females. He said reports were that many Mormon men left their wives in Nauvoo and took with them young girls instead. Now, we don't know why. Perhaps they abandoned their wives for the young brides, or perhaps, and more hopefully, the wives had had enough of the polygamous Mormon patriarchy and chose to stay behind. The point being, Mormon's history is polygamy, which included pedogamy. Now, as we wind down this topic, we want to present some early Mormon plural marriages along with the ages of both the male and the female. Now, this is information that I've gleaned from books with the historical references and the records and so on and so forth. It might surprise some of our viewers. I don't know if it surprised you when you first came across this.
All of this is.
But and it's just a little bit of the information too that's out there. We don't have time for all of it, obviously.
We just don't look at it though. We Mormons don't look at it.
Joseph Smith himself took 11 teenage brides from ages 19 down to 14 years old. He actually took two 14-year-old brides. And when he took them, most of them were, he was 37 and 38 years old when he married most of his young girls. Brian Hales and other defenders of the Mormon system continue to claim that he did not have sex with these young girls. Then why did he marry them for time and eternity?
Yeah.
You know, the consummation of the marriage is what the time part is all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being married here. So we need to also consider what 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball said.
I would never have been sealed or married to Joseph had I known it was anything more than ceremony. I was young. They deceived me by saying the salvation of our whole family depended on it.
She said she was deceived.
Arm twisting there.
And would not have agreed to the marriage if she had known that it was anything more than just a ceremony. So obviously she wasn't expecting something that she got or was expected to do.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
let's go to Brigham Young. Brigham Young married one 15-year-old when he was 42 years old. He married one 16-year-old when he was 44 years old, and he married three 17-year-old girls when he was 43 and 44 years old.
Yeah, we have Heber C. Kimball, married one at was 15 years old. He was 44. He married four girls that were only 16 when he was 43 and 44. Married one 17-year-old when he was age 44 and a 19-year-old when he was 55.
And that's Heber C. Kimball. He had 45 total wives, so he was involved in it as well.
John Taylor married one 19-year-old when he was 47 and another one that same year apparently, a 16-year-old when he was 47. And finally, Wilfred Woodruff married one 17-year-old when he was 45 and a 15-year-old when he was 46.
So these are all leaders, you know, presidents and leaders of the church, and they were involved in this pedogamy as well. In the book Nauvoo Polygamy, written by George D. Smith, a very good and informative book if you're interested in this kind of thing, there is a chart in the book of the polygamous marriages in Nauvoo.
Yeah.
It's a very comprehensive chart. Now, this doesn't include, by the way, this is polygamy in Nauvoo. This does not include the polygamy in Utah. But we want to pinpoint some of the marriages of young girls to older Mormon men who already had several wives.
Yeah, there's 5 of them we've listed here, but there are others.
Oh,
James
yeah.
Allred married 2 13-year-old girls when he was 73. Goodness.
Yeah.
Rufus Beach married a 16-year-old girl when he was 50. John Bernheisel married a 15-year-old girl when he was 46. Curtis Bolton took a 16-year-old when he was 33. And James Brown Jr. took a 16-year-old. He was 58.
And then John Butler took a 17-year-old girl when he was 48 years old. Albert Carrington married a 14-year-old. He was 25. William Carmichael was 62 and married a 17-year-old girl. Dominicus Cart was 38 when he married a 14-year-old girl. Now, these are all Mormon married men that we're describing here. All Mormon members and married.
And in Nauvoo, right?
In Nauvoo.
In Nauvoo. William Clayton took a 16-year-old when he was 36, and a 17-year-old when he was 52, and a 17-year-old again when he was 56. Joseph Coolidge married a 14-year-old when he was 30. Charles Crimson married a 15-year-old when he was 59. Isaac Decker was 57 when he married a 16-year-old. And Josiah Fleming married a 14-year-old when he was 48. And Elijah Fordham was 57 when he took a 16-year-old. You know, and you know what's going on with these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's sickening, really.
It's easy to figure out, isn't it,
Yeah.
when you see
I
all
mean,
this?
What else are you marrying these kids for? Yeah.
Levi Hancock was 43 years old when he married a 14-year-old girl. Edward Hunter was 63, married a 17-year-old. Orson Hyde was 52 years old when he married 2 16-year-old girls in 1857.
Yeah, you got to admire this. Aaron Johnson particularly liked the younger girls. At 39, he married a 14-year-old. At 45, he took a 17-year-old. At 46, a 15 and a 17-year-old. At 50, he took a 14 and a 15-year-old. Duncan MacArthur married a 16-year-old when he was 61, and she was his third wife. Orson Pratt married a 16-year-old at age 44 and another 16-year-old at age 57. These were his 8th and 10th wives, respectively. Charles Rich married two 14-year-old girls and a 15-year-old at age 35, 36, and 37. And 62-year-old Daniel Spencer married a 13-year-old at age 56 and a 14-year-old at age 62. And Levi Stewart took a 14-year-old at age 62. She was his 5th plural wife.
62 years old, he takes a 14-year-old girl, and he's already got 4 wives. So like you said, we know what's going on here.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't think, you can't almost think of the lust that's got to be in a man's heart to shop like that for young girls or
well, and
women,
they would have to take the young girls quickly, or somebody else would nab them before they could get them.
I mean, so you had to be shopping or trading, dickering, or doing something to get
Pedogamy.
to get these kids lined up. It's just
and like I said, this is just a few out of the chart. The chart is several pages long. As you can see, it's from pages 575 to 639. All those pages lists these men, and they weren't all polygamous, but I only picked out part of the young marriages. So there's a lot of them, and every single one of them are polygamous marriages. These men just kept on taking more and more, like we said, and age didn't seem to matter to the old men. But then the pool of unmarriageable girls have to get younger in polygamy. It has to. Yeah. And this and Utah got even worse, of course, when they got here. And the monstrous part of all of this is that they preached it was God's will and was part of his program to gain eternal exaltation. That's the worst part of it. They made polygamy, multisexual partners the Savior instead of Jesus Christ. And that's why we do this show. We want people to see what's going on and make some changes.
I just wish those in polygamy now would realize what journey they're on and what they're doing that isn't.
It's not required by God.
And you see all of these different kinds of aspects, the bad things that we talk about so often, don't you, in your own polygamy groups?
Yes, it just continues to go on.
Yeah.
Continues to go on and on. Thank you, Earl.
My pleasure.
I appreciate all of your help. And you know, God has spoken, and what he spoke is recorded in the Bible. Whether you believe it or not is your responsibility, and your lack of belief doesn't change the truth. He warned us in Isaiah 5, "Woe unto those who call evil good and who call good evil." This is also a warning to the polygamists. Polygamy is a forbidden practice, and it just incubates more and more evil against women and children. Jesus Christ is the Savior, and your polygamy isn't. So leave it. Find the Savior, because he alone can save you with no help of polygamy or any self-righteous works that you can do. Thank you for watching.